All right, guys, welcome to Unstuck with Hydrowear Wellness Lab, the podcast where real people share real stories behind getting their lives, their bodies, and their mindsets back on track. I'm your host, Bretton Hunt, and in every episode, we dive into powerful conversations with athletes, weekend warriors, health and wellness professionals, and everyday people who refuse to settle. These are the breakthroughs, the setbacks, the mindset shifts, the moments that get us unstuck. Today's guest, I'm joined by a person who understands what it takes to build programs, develop young men, and lead with purpose. Coach Myron Blueford is the head coach of ALA Ironwood in Queen Creek, Arizona. Coach Blueford has built football programs from the ground up, including helping launch and grow successful high school programs in Arizona. He's also known for his focus on culture, accountability, and developing athletes, not just for Friday nights, but for beyond football as well. And in addition to that, Coach Blueford is also a retired member of the United States Army Reserves, bringing a unique perspective on discipline, service, and leadership. Coach Blueford, I really appreciate you being with us today.
Yeah, thank you. I'm excited for sure.
Awesome. And before we dive into our conversation, I want to reiterate that you were a member of the Army Reserves and just thank you for your service. I really do appreciate that
Yeah,
and
no,
all the
thank you.
sacrifice that you went through with that. And with that, do you mind sharing just a little bit of your experience as a member of the Reserves and how that's helped shape you as a coach and as a person?
Yeah, I decided to go in the Army. I wasn't really sure why. Finished my second year playing college football at Phoenix College, and really wasn't like academically, it wasn't like loving school, and didn't know what I wanted to do in my career, and so I was kind of just in a lull. And my dad was in the military, my grandfather was in the military, and so I just decided, I'm going to do this, and and see what comes out of it. And about a week into it, I immediately regretted it. As it kind of went along, I definitely embraced it. My dad was a stepdad was a pastor, so like I lived in a home of discipline and structure, and so quickly adjusted. And the experience was great. I think from a confidence standpoint, even though I was a pretty good, high school athlete, and my parents instilled, culture and instilled, standards in my life. It was just something that kind of reiterated it, and I think fortified it a little bit more. And I walked out of that situation a lot more confident in what I'm able to do. I think it again kind of solidified some of the discipline aspects, and it was just great. You meet people from all over the world and different walks of life, and you got this hodgepodge of personalities, but a one common goal of you're preparing to defend this country if that comes to be. And so it was a great experience. Very very much so like being in a football program, and so didn't realize it at the time, but God had a plan for me, and it was really kind of putting those blocks together so that when I did get to my career, I can lean on that experience.
That's awesome. Yeah. Thank you again for your service. I have some friends that are in the Army and in the reserves, and they kind of say the same thing. Think of it like a football team, just a
Yeah.
little bit more intense and a little, it's not so much a game anymore. But
Right. Yeah, for sure.
so you mentioned you played college football a little bit. So take us back to how did football become a part of your life? How did it become something that you said, yeah, this is what I want to do. I want to go and coach football. That's what I want to do.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. Like, I think like a lot of people, my household wasn't a football household. Like we didn't have football on Saturdays and Sundays. I mean, sports for that matter, weren't on TV. And so I kind of started gravitating. My mom put me into basketball, at a young age, and just really embraced it, loved it. I carried a basketball with me everywhere I went. And then once I got into high school, I went from like 6 foot 170, and then I was like, 6'1", and then I was like almost 250 in one summer. And
Wow.
it was my sophomore year, and the football coach sees me playing basketball. He's like, "Hey, what are you doing playing this sport? You need to come over here and play football for us." And I didn't know anything about football, like not
Yeah.
anything at all. So my sophomore year was my first year, playing, and I just started getting a lot of attention, from it. And obviously as a young kid, like you love it when people are telling you that you're good at something, and so I just kind of stuck with it. And part of the reason why I went in the military was after I was done playing at Phoenix College for those 2 years. I didn't really have a passion for football. Like I grew up, playing basketball and being in the church and doing other things. And so I just, it was just kind of like, okay, like I guess football's done. And so kind of fast forward, I, tore my ACL, started playing semi-pro
Oh,
football, and
wow.
a buddy of mine that was playing with me during the recession. He was like, "Hey man, like I can get you a job, but you need to help me coach this youth football team." I was like, "Man, I'm not a coach. That's not I don't do that." And I was like, he's like, "Well, I guess you don't want this job." So, so I went and helped him out, and they took one practice, of just kind of going through, I think they were 11 years old, around that age, and just they're hanging on every word that I said, anything I was telling them, like they were looking for that gratification of that they accomplished it. And I knew instantly, like, I don't want to feed these kids just anything. If I have their
Mhm.
attention, I need to give them something that's meaningful and say things that are meaningful and make sure that it's positive so that they have great self-esteem, especially at that age. And so I just fell in love with it. I fell in love with the impact that I could make as a coach. And that's really what drove me. And so at that point, I would say, especially now looking back, I was like, my football IQ wasn't that highest. And I probably shouldn't have been in some of the roles that I got, early on in my career, but playing in college kind of opened some doors for me and learned a ton. And it was really just like, I need to know what I'm doing as a coach so that I can make an impact on these kids in their lives. And so that's really what hooked me. As soon as I had that experience, I was like, yes, this is what I want to do in some shape or form. And I think at the time it was more of a, kind of part-time, like I was having success in my career at that time, and then kind of gravitated to like, hey, I want to do this full time and invest in all my time in doing that. And so I kind of made the transition.
That's awesome. And so when you made that transition, because, as I was reading more about you and your career and stuff, I noticed a lot of the programs and jobs that you had early on were kind of startups, kind of a thing, and really just building a football team to start off. So what drove or what brought you to that idea of, I want to take on this challenge of building a football team from the ground up?
Yeah, I'll be 100% honest. Simply was just the opportunity. I was coaching at Phoenix College at the time, so I went back to my alma mater and was
Hmm.
coaching there. I was a co-defensive coordinator. I was the lead recruiter there, and I was having a blast. And at the time, I think I wanted going into it, I wanted to be a college coach. As I was there, I be honest with you, I can't even really tell you what made me think like, hey, maybe high school is the route that I want to go, but. Started applying for jobs, and honestly, I mean, I didn't get really any responses. I really didn't get any emails back, and I was like, man, maybe this isn't going to work out for me. Arizona College Prep was a startup program. Um, I recruited the CUSD, so I was familiar with those schools, and when I saw the ACP, I was like, what? I don't even know what this is. Like I recruit CUSD. They don't have football, and I don't even know what ACP is, and so did my due diligence, looked into it, found out it was a startup program. They were going to start in 2A. And at that time, and I'm sure every coach, would tell you, like getting that first job is the hardest one to get. And so
Hmm.
really don't say no to anything. If you're getting that first job and they say yes, you kind of need to take it to get your foot in the door. And so that's kind of the approach I took. I was like, I'll take ACP and see it's 2A, so small ball, and I'll cut my teeth there, and I'll hopefully do a good job, and I can leverage that, and maybe go take another job. And so what I found is it was a huge blessing in disguise for my career and for my own personal development of being able to go into a program with no expectations, no standards. I wasn't following behind anyone. So I got to kind of do things my way, and I could do it really unapologetically. And the admin that was there, they weren't really football people. So they weren't going to tell me like I was doing something right or wrong. And so I really got to, make errors, and it was low cost, low risk, and I could
Hmm.
learn from them and kind of build from there. And so I would love to say like I came into the coaching game wanting to start a program. That absolutely was not the case. I was really worried and nervous about it, but I mean, the long term, it ended up being a blessing, for me.
Awesome. So now that you've built a couple of programs now, what would you say the biggest obstacle is when you're coming into a new job as a head coach and building a program? What's the hardest thing?
Yeah, I think it's managing your own expectations. I think we all get into this game thinking that we're going to be one of the best coaches, that there were, whether it be in your
Hmm.
school or in the state or in the country, whatever. And so sometimes when you go in with those expectations, a startup program, you're not going to meet those. I mean, you can luck out and strike gold and take over a program or start a program that just has a whole bunch of dudes lying around and, they end up having success just by happenstance. But typically that's not the way it's going to work. You're going to start a program, or if you're taking over a program, it's usually because that program was not doing well and they either let that coach go or that coach didn't think that there was any growth or whatever and they made a move. So you're never really going to take on a good situation. So when you go into those, I think as a head coach, you kind of have to lower what your expectations are as far as the outcome, understand what the process is and focus on the process. But I think if you go in thinking, if I thought ACP, hey, we're gonna win a championship our first year, I'm just setting myself up for failure. I'm setting our kids up for failure. I mean, so it was just go in, really focus on the process of building a program, let the expectations kind of dictate themselves, but just do the process and you'll get the outcome that you want, or the best outcome that you could get.
I really like that
Yeah.
answer because I think that can be with anything, right? Whether you're starting a new job, whether you're, starting to, I don't know, lose weight or whatever you're trying to do, right? If your expectations are too like drastic where you're, putting way too much pressure on yourself, that it could be a good thing, but it also sets you up for when if you don't achieve those things
Right.
where you're feeling bad and could set you back a little bit as well. So I like that answer. Throughout your career, I'm sure you've dealt with adversity and hard times. Could you share a moment that where you felt stuck, whether it was whatever part of your life you were in, and how you managed to get yourself unstuck from that moment?
Yeah, when I stepped down from ACP, I think it kind of sent some shockwaves throughout Arizona, because we had a ton of success in building that program from a 2A program to a 5A program. We had just come off a season where we went to the semifinals, lost in 4 overtimes to the team that ended up winning the championship, and I stepped down after that, and so I think that kind of set shockwaves through everyone. But for me, it was just time. Like there's a lot of factors that kind of went into it, but ultimately it was just time for me to kind of move on. What a lot of people don't know is I had zero clue what my next step was. Like I didn't know if I was going to go back, to the industry that I was in, before I started coaching. I didn't know if I was going to, I did know I didn't want to be a head coach again right away. I
Mhm,
wanted to kind of take some time, and my daughter was transitioning into high school, and I kind of wanted to be around for that, eighth grade
mhm,
freshman year. And so I stepped down thinking like, yeah, there's going to be a ton of opportunities. I don't know what I want to do, but I'm going to have a ton of things that I can choose from, go from there. What I found was the job market is different, and how, I've been out of the market for 9 years at that point. And so, applying for jobs, my experience in coaching, sometimes doesn't translate to the normal industries in the world. And then from a coaching standpoint, I had a few opportunities. Most of them were, like head coach opportunities, which I really didn't want to get into right away. I had a couple opportunities to be assistant coaches. Arizona Christian was one that I was really high on, but that didn't work out. Couldn't get on campus there. I mean, the school's so far from where I live. I was like, I
mhm.
can't make that just to go coach. Like I got to have a job there. And so, so I had a couple others, schools that were kind of navigating and interviewing me and like if the right situation. And so, so it was tough. I mean, I have a family, I have a rent, I have things that I got to
Yeah.
pay for. And at this point, I was kind of in limbo. And so it was tough, process for me. And I think the biggest thing was, yeah, I needed to be patient. I think that's the hardest thing is everybody, especially now in our society now, we want things instantly.
Mhm,
So I was stressing at that piece of it of just not knowing and then not being patient with it. And, really what it came down to is, I needed to have faith and that there was a plan for me. And then the other aspect was I work. And I have to I think it's twofold. It distracts me. So I pour everything into, at that point, applying for jobs, fixing my resume. I was doing mock interviews. I mean, I was just working. And I was like, as long as I'm doing that, I feel like there's some type of progression.
mhm,
Then I was just being diligent, in the process and trusting the process. And so I'm a big control what you can control guy. And, that at that point in my life, I didn't have any control, really over where I was going to land. It was
mhm,
going to be happenstance. It was going to be an opportunity maybe I knew or didn't know about. I didn't have any control over that, but I had control over what my mindset was. I had control over the process and pouring into that work. And I just did that. And, fortunate that, but in doing so, Coach Dawson was the head coach here before I took over, and he was my defensive coordinator back when I played at Phoenix College. And so,
Oh, wow.
yeah, so just had a, because of doing that, and there's like a lot of a lot of programs I said no to, and
Hmm.
without knowing what I was gonna added more stress and anxiety, because 'cause I'm like, why would I say no to this? I don't know what I'm gonna be doing right now, and I can't afford to say no to some of these people. But, I just kinda trusted the process. I trusted God, and, this kind of Coach Dawson reached out to me, had a great position for me on campus, talked about the program and what they wanted to build here, and I was sold, and I was like, "Yep, this is it. This is the right one." So, I would say if you're feeling you're stuck in a situation, I think the process, trusting the process, trust that there's a plan, and that was the hardest piece for me, but I persevered through that, obviously.
That's awesome. Yeah. So you were the defensive coordinator for a couple of years under Coach Dawson, right? And
For 1 year, yeah.
for 1 year, and then you took over this last year, correct?
Correct.
So, and I imagine because you guys, and I didn't know you guys, that you had, played under him and,
Yeah.
he had been your coach and all that. That's really cool.
Yeah.
So I'm sure you guys had a lot of similar ideas of how you wanted a program run, what to do, what not to do. But I also think there's probably some differences too, where you had certain things that you had learned at your other stops and things that you wanted to implement. So day one as the head coach of ALA Ironwood, what was the first thing that you wanted established or that was already there that you wanted to reiterate? This is how we do things here at ALA Ironwood. This is the type of program that we want to be, and this is what we do. What was the
Yeah.
first thing you wanted?
Yeah, this is a unique situation where, I was in the program, so you're right. I kind of knew the ins and outs. I always say like I knew where the bathroom was, because
Right.
you take a job and there's like there's little things like that you don't even think about. Like, oh my gosh, I don't
Mhm.
even know where I need to go here to go to the restroom, and so I kind of knew the ins and outs of the program. Coach Dawson did a great job, previous to his tenure because he was here for 2 seasons. Previous to that, there just wasn't a lot of structure, a lot of discipline on campus. We're a uniform school, so shirts are tucked in, no earrings, hairs need to be cut, things like that. And so when Dawson came in, he really kind of established that foundation of like, hey, this is if you're going to be a part of the program, like this is what it needs to be. As I got in, it was just we were just driving it in more. Like we had the foundation and the kind of infancy stage of it. And so, I got in and he really did lean on me a lot because he had been in college for years and
Mhm.
and I hadn't coached high school in probably 20 years or so. And so the landscape of high school and how you run a high school program has been different. He knew I had just built, ACP. So he kind of leaned on me a little bit on those things, and which was great, especially as someone that I see as a mentor, kind of
Mhm.
bouncing those back and forth. And so I even got more of an in-depth look at where the program was, and how it was functioning. So when I took over, I kind of, the pieces that we needed to continue to build on and make sure that we continue that track to get this program where it needed to be. And so that was really more of a continuation. I think the thing that I kind of added was I want to build this thing to be a powerhouse program. And so by doing that, it is like getting with our junior high kids, getting a feeder program,
Mhm.
doing, being on social media and that presence and, making sure that everybody knows out there that we are a legit program, that we're on the rise, that this is a place that you want to be and help build. I think that was more of the aspect that I kind of brought, and then from the discipline standpoint, we just made it harder. I mean, like I said, we had the foundation, that was kind of set by Coach Dawson. I just raised it, and so the GPA requirements, to be in program. I
Mhm.
was like, all right, that's great, that's the standard. But if you want to be a part of this program, this is what it's going to be. And then we implement a whole bunch of accountability pieces and I have being a junior high AD is kind of fortunate. I have a lot of bandwidth, which
Mhm.
stuff that I couldn't do before because I was kind of attached to a classroom. And so I'm using that time to make sure, that we're holding our boys accountable. And then that was kind of the next phase as I took over. And the boys embraced it, and again, it's a lot of credit to Coach Dawson for kind of laying that foundation because it would not have had as much success if I was taking over before he kind of did it.
That's great. Yeah. And so with you wanting to build a powerhouse and all that, like kids nowadays, like when I played high school football, we didn't worry too much about someone leaving for another school, right, or transferring or anything like that. The landscape of, I mean, all college sports, high school sports kind of shifted quite dramatically. So, and there's turnover every year, right? But so as a head coach, how do you get a player, maybe a new player, maybe it's a player that hasn't played a lot, but starting to show signs that, hey, this kid can play. How do you get them to buy into what you're telling them to do, and what you're teaching them? If they haven't, maybe they come from a different program that didn't do things the way you do it. How do you get them to buy into what you're teaching them?
Yeah, so that I mean, honestly, that piece for me is easy. It is all about relationships. I think if you ask any of my players how I feel about them and why they like playing for me. I don't think it's going to have really much to do with football, but everything to do with the conversations that we have outside of that. When they come in my office and we don't talk about football. I mean, like in season, obviously
Mhm.
we'll talk about that, but now they still come in my office and we talk about everything under the sun. I think they know that I care about them more about their life and setting them up for life than I do about what they can do for me on the football field. And I think once you establish that, the kids will do anything. They will do
Mhm.
absolutely anything for you. They're going to kill it on the field for you. And so I pour everything into that. I pour everything into the relationship piece, and I think it makes it easy. So regardless of where you're at in the program, if you're one of our studs that we count on you, you still know that I care about you more as a person than I do as a player, and you're going to work your tail off. If you're, hurting for playing time and you're maybe not getting any playing time and, you just want to be out on the field, you still are going to love being in our program because you're going to love all the things that we do and all the attention that we put on things that aren't associated with being on the field. And so I think just from top down, we do a good job of making sure that everyone in our program feels that they're a part of it, that they have some role. And we still have, you got to work your tail off. Playing time's not
Mhm.
promised. Those things are still a part of this, but we're going to make sure that we acknowledge and recognize every kid in our program at some point, throughout the year, so that they know that this is more than just what you can do on the football field. And so our retention was great this year. We've had more kids come out this year than we had last year. Our junior high, we're doing, junior high tackle football right now. And my high school AD just came in and he was like, they're putting fees in. And he's like, Blue, do we really have like 72 kids out there for junior high? And I was like, we do, which is about 20 to 30 more than we had last year. And it has nothing to do with my ability to coach X's and O's. It has nothing to do with, the social media and all that stuff, and everything to do with I'm walking around campus all the time, talking to junior high kids with nothing to do with football because I want them to just come play for me. And so I think that helps. It helps in having those tough conversations, when kids aren't playing and they want to come talk with you and say like, hey, what do I need to do to get on the field? And, it's easy when the kid has some talent and there's a path for them to get on
Mhm.
the field. The conversations are hard when the kid's really not ever going to play because of who's in front of them or their own abilities or whatever. If they know that this is a relationship where I care about you and I'm going to be open and honest and transparent with you, I'm going to tell you some tough news right now that, the opportunity is probably not going to be there. It's gonna carry over so much better. They're not gonna quit. They're gonna know where they're at. They may not love it. They may not like it, but they're gonna keep showing up because they're gonna love what the program is about. And so I think that just the relationship piece just makes all of those things a lot easier to handle.
That's great. Yeah, looking back on my high school career, I'm just a high school Harry. That's all I did was play in high school. But coach, and we were a small program. We were in Thatcher, Arizona, so 2A all throughout my high school. But those relationships, I still have relationships with my coaches to this day, right? And I knew they cared about me as a person. They knew I wasn't going anywhere, right, to go play college. Very few people did, but it was nice knowing they cared about me not only as one of their players, but as a person. And then when they asked me to do something that might have been hard or they had some tough news or whatever it was a lot easier for me to say, okay, coach, yeah, I'll do that for you.
Right.
Right.
Yep.
And so
100%.
I love that. So you mentioned you want ALA Ironwood to be a powerhouse. And I think every coach wants that for their program. And so what would you say excites you the most about ALA Ironwood? What is it that gives you that hope of, yes, we're going to be a powerhouse like any of these other high schools around the valley?
Yeah, we have the talent on campus, and one of the biggest fortunate things that we have, with all of the ALAs is that we have, junior highs on our campus. And we play in the CAA for junior high football, so we're able to play tackle football. And
Mhm,
so I mean, we have, like I said, I have 72 kids, on our junior high roster right now, and so it's up to me to build a culture where they want to stay, and that's going to be the really what the driving force is for us to have some success is, because say what you want, it is numbers. Like if you
mhm,
have numbers in your program, that is going to be the leg up for you to continue to move up the ranks. And we have a I think we have a good culture, a good foundation of our culture, which I think our kids are spreading the word on campus, they're spreading the word outside of campus, doing the things on social media. There's all of those little things that are going to make us an attractive place, to go.
mhm.
We're growing like crazy out here, in the East Valley.
Yeah.
There's not really a school out here, at least east of us, that
Mhm,
have kind of established themselves as like powerhouse where you want to go to that school. And so we have the opportunity for that. And so I think, that at this point, with all the building and all the growth that's going on here, there's a few of us schools that, have an opportunity to establish themselves as the school you want to go to if you're in the area. And we're going to do everything that we can, to make sure that we're one of those schools.
mhm. That's awesome. So with all those kids coming in, and you mentioned, relationships is really one of the key things you like to focus on.
Mhm.
What do you want the young men that go through your program to remember, as after their time is done, whether they won a state championship, whether they didn't win a state championship, what kind of young men are you trying to build in that program?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I know, most will say the same thing. And I mean it to my core. You really won't know how well of a job we did until they graduate.
Mhm,
And so once they graduate, I think they get perspective, they go to college, then they start getting married and start, having kids and things like that. And for me, like I kind of measure my success on once they get to that point, do they still value the experience they had in my program? Are there moments in their lives where they reach adversity or they need to make a tough decision? Is it my voice or am I one of the voices that they hear, that in
mhm,
making those decisions? Are they calling me or texting me because they need to make those decisions or they're in a hard time? I think that's the kind of the measure of success for me once I see that. And I think for me, it's more on are they able to handle those things? Like, did I do a good enough job to make sure that when they were doing 40/40s in the summer, in the heat, that they realized that it wasn't necessarily to be conditioned to go play football. It was, can I handle hard? Like, can I handle
mhm,
something that's really difficult and can I push through it? And then in the end, can I realize how well of a job I did in pushing through that adversity that's going to translate to life? And so I talk about it all the time, my whole coaching staff, like we got to be intentional. Like the lessons in football are obvious, or I mean, they're inherent, but they're not always obvious. And
mhm,
so we need to make sure that when we're yelling at kids and we're getting on them or we're pushing them and trying to get them past their threshold, that we also A, love them, and then B, make sure they understand why we were doing what we were doing and how that's going to translate to life, because that's the only way they're going to make that connection when they do. And so I think that is, what I really want from our kids. And again, it's hard to see it in the 4 years that we have them, but
mhm.
you do see it once they graduate. Tons of examples that just it makes me feel fulfilled in my life, when I have these guys that have graduated 4 or 5 years ago, that are still
Mhm.
reaching out, wanna have lunch, they're still telling me about, their life and want me to be a part of it, and then they're telling me about their adversity and how they overcame it, and they're like, they reference things that they've done in my program, that got them there, and so I think that's kind of the mission for us. Mm.
That's awesome. So so you mentioned too, like, because the relationships are so important too, and sometimes you have to have tough conversations
Mhm.
with high school athletes, whether it be, "Hey, you're messing up here and you need to be better here. Like, we're coaching you to do this way. Where's the disconnect, right?" Or just it's simply, "Hey, you're not good enough right now."
Mm.
Right? There's so and so in front of you. Like, playing time is going to be scarce if there's any. So what do you tell those kids that maybe feel that way? Like, oh man, I'm stuck now. right? Like, or, what do you tell a kid that maybe feels overlooked or stuck in the moment right there to help them get unstuck?
Yeah, I think kind of the same I was talking about with the coaches coming into a new program is the first thing I asked them is like, "Wait, what are your expectations with this? Like, what are you
Mhm,
trying to get out of this? Like, are you when your high school career is done, are you not going to feel fulfilled if you're not a starter that's playing every single minute?" And once we kind of establish like what their expectations in, and I grill them. I mean, I can't. Everybody wants to be a starter, right? So we kind of we dive into it, and I'd say like, all right, yeah, you want to be a starter, but you are a junior. The kid that's starting right now is also a junior. So like, if you don't start? Like, how are you going to get a great experience out of this program? And then we kind of get into like the nuts and bolts of it. Of we evaluate everything that kids do. We have just us is our mantra. But the us part, the united, the sacrifice part, we have what we call an us score, and it measures everything that they do throughout the like their practices, they're watching film, doing their scouting report, not getting in trouble, being academically eligible. And we put
mhm,
a us score up every single week, and so it gives something tangible that we can lean on. And so if there's a kid that's missing in some of those areas, like we lean on those areas, like, hey, we need you to do X, Y, and Z before we can really even have this conversation because you're not meeting the standard just yet. If a kid is meeting that standard, again, we're just open and honest. Like, I'm not gonna sugarcoat it to tell them, "Hey, this is the situation that you're in. You have to just trust the process and work and continue to work. Hopefully, you get an opportunity. I tell you, so and so is gonna get hurt or so and so is gonna get tired, and you're gonna get an opportunity to go, but she's got to be ready." And then we relate it to life, because it's not going to be like that in life. Not there's not everyone in life, working is not the superstar. Like some of the guys are
mhm,
just they're just the guys that are there to support and to do their jobs and make sure that the company has success. So I think trying to make all those connections. I think one of the biggest things, with me is I am very open and vulnerable, to my team. I want them to see me as a human. Like I talk about my
mhm,
family all the time. I'm a very emotional person. I've yet to get through a banquet in my entire career without bawling. So I want my kids to see that because when I
mhm.
have these heart to heart conversations about where they're at and where their emotions are and where they're not feeling fulfilled, they know that it's coming from a real human, not just a coach that's like, "Hey, I'm about X's and O's and we got to win games." They know that it's coming from a real person, and so I think all of those things with building the relationships, holding them accountable, having tangible things to reference, when they are asking these questions, being open and honest with them, and then, like I said, showing my emotion so that they know that I'm a real person, it makes those conversations, I'll say easier. They're still not easy. Obviously, I want every kid to play. I want every
Right.
kid to feel fulfilled, and being in our program. But, as we build and as you get more numbers, like that becomes less and less of a possibility. And so you got to make sure that, they understand what their role is, understand like, here's the process, here's what you need to do, be open and honest with them. I mean, usually the outcome is good, again, and I think for me too, it's more of let me try to avoid a cancer. Let me try to avoid someone quitting. I mean, let me try to avoid someone from pouting and being miserable. And so
Mhm.
trying to find that, get them to a point where like, hey, you understand that playing is probably not going to be on the cards, whether it be this year or, whatever, but you're still a part of this. And I still want you to have a good experience. And I think we do a pretty good job of kind of managing that. And, you got people with different expectations and you can't please everybody. But at least when it's all said and done, I know that we did right by every kid that we tried to.
That's awesome. So I don't know how much you know about the facility that we have over here in Gilbert, but one of the main focuses we have is just helping people, high school athletes, no matter who they are, just one, work out at like a gold standard level, but then also recover.
Mhm.
And so how important would you say recovery is for your athletes, and what does that look like for your athletes?
Yeah, we lucky we're fortunate that we do have, a strength and conditioning coach that's on our staff and he's our running backs coach as well. And so there's a lot of communication between him and I. I personally I understand that this is a grind. I understand, especially nowadays where, if you're going to be a successful football program, it's for the most part, it is year round. And so understanding that, they're student athletes. So they have social lives, they have families, they have school. They have a lot of different things on their plate. both physically and emotionally. I mean, so making sure that we're giving them breaks, that we're giving them those times to decompress. We try to do it during the season. Again, we work every single day. We're doing something, whether it be with the junior high or the high school or whatnot. But we just always have that mindset, and I think I'm very cognizant of it as we kind of go throughout the grind of the actual season. If we need to taper off, even if it's at risk of maybe not being effective in some areas, but from the long term, it's going to make us have better athletes, and from a nutrition standpoint, then we'll do those things. And so I think we're just very cognizant of it. We preach nutrition daily, even in the off season. It's a conversation. We have cheat sheets, so I'm not dumb. I know they're going to go to McDonald's, and I know they're going to go to KFC or whatever. We have like a cheat sheet that we give our players that, says, hey, if you're going to go to McDonald's, like eat this, because this is going to be the
Mhm.
best fuel for your body, in that particular restaurant. So we try to touch on, every aspect. And I think it's just something that you can always do a little bit better, obviously, but it's definitely something in our program we're not ignoring or being naive about. So yeah, we just kind of do our best to, all year round to try to make sure that we're mentally, physically, emotionally, taking care of our athletes.
Awesome. So I'm sure another thing that like coaches kind of going back to what you coaches deal with and building a program, another thing that you guys have to deal with, and probably more so now, is parents,
Mm.
right? And just parents' expectations of their kids, all those things. So for any parents that are listening, what's something that you wish they understood better about, building a football program, being a successful football program? What's something you wish they understood maybe a little bit better?
Yeah, I think it's that they're involved in it too. That's one thing that we preach family all the time, and I know a ton of programs across the nation talk about family, but we're very intentional with that, because I truly believe that if the parents are invested, the kids' experience is going to be a lot better. And so we encourage it. We have mom brunch during our bye week, and so all the varsity kids can bring their mom, and we feed them. We play a whole bunch of games. And it's kind of have fun, and so we want them to feel like they're a part of it. This year we did dads and decals, so every program that has to put decals on their helmet, well, unless you don't have any, but they put
Right.
decals on their helmets. I was like, man, like one of my assistant coaches was like, hey, like we used to do something like this, or I've heard of something like this, and I was like, dude, that's awesome. Like our dads
Hmm.
get to come in and be a part of putting the decals on. Like what a great memory. And so I think that's probably the biggest one is like, hey, like we need you to be involved and need you to be a part of it. I think
Hmm.
the other thing is, and I think this is kind of across the board, not necessarily just with parents, but I think in society today, and understandably so, with the platform that high school, college, and the NFL has with the sport of football and the popularity that it has, I think we forget sometimes in high school that it is still an extracurricular. They are students. This is supposed to be a tool to make them better men when they
Hmm.
graduate from here. It's not, yes, there's gonna be some kids that go play at the next level, and so that's their focus, and I 100% get that. I am a big, big advocate on recruiting. That's one of my favorite things to do, but at the same time, that's not what they're here for. They're
Hmm.
here to get an education and to play football that's going to supplement their growth so that when they get out of high school, they're better prepared for life. I think a lot of parents kind of forget that. I think they look at, football either as a tool to go play at the next level, their kid to shine or live vicariously through their kid. So I think some parents do forget that if I'm sending my kid to a program, I just want them to develop as a human being. And if that's what's going to happen, I'm good with whatever the result is. It's not necessarily the case in a lot of parents. And so I do appreciate the ones that do reach out and say, like, hey, we appreciate you do things the right way. And there might be kids that don't play at all. And they're still like, we love it. We love what you do. We
Hmm.
love the culture that you build because we understand what this is about. And then you have the ones that are like, hey, my kid's not playing. Like, what's going on? And it's like, yeah, that's not really what this is about. So I would say those two things. Yeah, be involved, be a part of it because it's going to make the experience better for everyone. And then understand that this is an extracurricular. This is meant to develop men, not to develop prospects or superstars.
Awesome. So for young coaches out there, and then maybe just new coaches in general, what's something that you think they focus on maybe too much, and what would you say they should focus on instead? When you first came in as a coach at ACP, what's something that maybe you focused on too much that you wish you hadn't focused on, and how would you change that?
Yeah, I think, like, going into ACP, and this is 100% what my advice is to any young coaches, is to be patient. When I went into ACP, like I said before, I 100% went into thinking it's gonna be a stepping stone, and so I went into thinking, yeah, 3, 4 years, I'm gonna have a full class, and then I'm gonna go, be a coach at, X school that's at 6A, and then I'm gonna go,
Mhm.
I'm gonna keep climbing, and that's the path. And once I got to ACP, I quickly realized like what it's really about, and it was like my own personal development as a coach and fine tuning myself as a coach, as a head of a program. And so I think, as I look at the landscape of younger coaches kind of getting in the game, I think their mindset is instantly like, I got to be at the top school. So yeah, like I'll take this job, but I'm only taking it for X amount of years, and I'm gonna network, and which no negatives on networking by any means, but doing it with the purpose of trying to move up the ladder as fast as possible. I think that's
Mhm.
just the wrong approach. And again, going back to setting expectations, you're a human being. So if you're like, yeah, and I'm gonna go take this 2A job, as an assistant coach, but I want to be a head coach at 6A in 3 years. Well, that is really, really difficult to do. And then when you don't reach that measurement, then you instantly feel like you're failing and you're not where you need to be, and so you start pressing even more and maybe making some decisions that aren't going to be advantageous for you to get to that point. So I think just having patience, because the slower that you go, the more developed you're going to get, the more fine-tuned you're going to get, and the more prepared you're going to be as you do start moving up. And so I would just say to slow down, be where your feet are, learn as much as you possibly can, and you kind of know the time when it's time to make the next move.
Awesome. In your program, just from things that I've read, it seems like you guys focus a lot on, one, player development, but then also just off the field things too.
Mhm.
Like helping make these young men great athletes, but also just great men in general and being leaders in society. So how do you define leadership to your players? What is a
Yeah.
leader to you?
Yeah, it's so funny, and I give this analogy all the time. And so we have a leadership program here where, kids have to email, say they want to be a part of it. It's about 6 weeks that we go through. It's lessons with me every week. They have like little, I always hesitate to say assignments, but the little tasks that they have to do
Hmm.
throughout that time. I mean, in order to be a captain for our program, you have to go through that process. And so, but in one of the lessons in the leadership program, I asked them all, like, hey, who do you guys think, like, it could be someone famous or whatever, like who do you guys classify as being a good leader? And so they kind of go around and they say the typical things, like the president, obviously they'll say LeBron James, and so they'll say all those things, and then so it gets back to me, and I'll say, who I think is one of the best leaders of all time? Hitler. And they all look at me like, what, coach? Like, what are you talking about? But I'm like, well, the definition of being a leader is people following you. And I was like, he had an entire nation following him on what his agenda was. Now, was he a good leader? No. Like his whole agenda was negative and it was terrible. And I was like, so that when we go through this process of going through our leadership program, it's your ability to have people follow you is awesome. If you have them follow you in the wrong direction, it's not going to be good for anyone involved in it. And I was like, so you have a responsibility. Like if you have the ability to have people follow you, then you have a responsibility to make sure that they're going in the right direction. And so we kind of define it as that, like you have to have that innate ability. And sometimes it's a small group of people. Sometimes you have the ability to lead a majority of people, and we're going to have that within our program. We're going to have one player that follows one player because he, whatever, he's fond of him, or, just has an attachment to that person. Well, if you have one person that is following you, you have a responsibility to take them in the right direction. If you're the leader of the team, well, you have the entire team, and that is your responsibility to lead them in the right direction. And so we kind of define it as that. And I think it hit home when I make that Hitler, kind of
Yeah.
analogy, they instantly understand, like, just because you're popular, just because people follow you, doesn't mean that you're a good leader. You gotta make sure
Mhm.
you lead them in the right direction and do the right things to make sure that they're going there. So I think it hit home, and I think we do a great job of kinda defining that for all of our players.
Awesome. I really like that definition. And the analogy is a really good analogy. So, just a couple more questions for you before we finish. What does success look like for you at the end of the season? Is it solely holding up? I can't imagine it is, but I'll ask it anyway. Is it solely just holding up a trophy at the end of the year that's, we're the state champions of whatever division that you're in at that moment? Or what does success look like to you?
Yeah, I think, there's a lot of different measurements to that. I think, from a tangible standpoint, I guess it's kinda hard to gauge too, on kids' experience and whether or not they had a great experience, but I think one of the measurements of that is retention. We do an exit interview with all of our players in our program, and one of the questions we ask is, describe your experience, and then are you planning on playing next year? And we kinda use that for our, retention numbers, and so regardless of how the season goes, I've had really, really successful seasons, this past season and taking over, we went 2-8, so not a lot of success, on the field. And so at the end of the season, really it's like, all right, like we had a losing season. How many of these kids are gonna help us build and come back and be a part of this? And so once you kind of see like, yes, like I'm coming back and it's not the kids that the kids that are just football kids, regardless, they're gonna play regardless.
Hmm.
It's the kids that maybe didn't play that much or, whatever the situation was, all of those kids saying, yes, like I want to be a part of this. I want to. So I think that is a really good tangible measurement for our success. I think, for me, kind of on a not, I understand every single year, especially in high school, because, we can't recruit, the kids that we necessarily need to fill in certain,
Hmm.
roles, but being the best versions of ourselves. And so like this year, I don't think 2-8 was the best version of us. So I think we kind of fell a little bit short, of our, what I would say, a successful season. Obviously a lot of things that kind of went into that, and it's not, an excuse, but it's, new coaching staff, like new culture, new
Hmm.
schemes. I mean, a lot of new stuff that kind of went into that. But when it comes down to it, we did not have a successful season because I feel like we have really good athletes, really good football players, and we didn't meet. I don't think we maximized what their potential is this season. And so next season, that's the agenda, that's the plan. And at the end of the season, if I feel confident again, it's not really a tangible thing. It's just you just kind of know if your kids played their hearts out and they maximized what their ability is, whether that leads to a 2-8 season or an 8-2 season, you kind of just have to accept that's what it is, And I rewind back to first year of ACP. I had two kids that had ever played football before, and they're all playing varsity. I have a ton of freshmen that are
Hmm.
starting on a varsity, high school team. We went 2-8 that year. Think that was the best that we could do. I felt like at the end of that season, we maximized the potential that they had at that moment, knowing that they were gonna be really good, in the future, but that year, 2-8 was the best that we were gonna be able to do. This program, this situation, 2-8 was not the best that I think we could have done, and so I think kinda measuring that is, again, it's intangible, it's kinda hard to really quantify, but I think, as a coach, you've been doing it long enough, whether or not you really got the max potential out of all of your kids. And so I think that's the intangible of that. I think you have the tangible of, hey, kids are going to come back. They want to be a part of this. We had a successful season in that regard. So.
Awesome. And then one more question for you before we'll finish. If you could leave one message with athletes, parents, anybody that right now it's just feeling stuck in life, or wherever, whatever it is, whether it's spiritually, financially, physically, mentally, wherever they are, what would that message be?
Yeah, I think faith is huge. And, regardless if you're, a religious or spiritual person, just having faith that the situation that you are currently in is not the end all be all. There's going to be better. There's going to be progress. As long as you keep your head down and just trust the process and just work your tail off. And that's, for me, I kind of mentioned that before, with my own personal situation, I had no idea what the outcome is, and we none of us do. We have no idea what tomorrow is going to bring for us. So don't focus on something that you can't control. 'Cause I'm gonna have faith that tomorrow is gonna be great, and then today I am going to work my tail off on every task, everything that I can do to better myself. This is gonna ultimately ensure that tomorrow is going to be great. And so I think, yeah, just have faith, put your head down, and just go to work. And then ultimately, it might be a short term situation that you're stuck, which is great. It might be a long term, situation, but if it's a long term situation and you still have that faith that in the end of all of this, I'm going to be where I want to be or where I need to be, and you are just grinding and almost distracting yourself with the process, then you ultimately end up where you need to be. And so, yeah, have faith, put your head down, and just go to work.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I love doing these podcasts in the short time that I've been doing it. I always feel just uplifted and just motivated to just go tackle whatever's going on in life. So I really appreciate you coming on, taking some time out of your busy day to share your experience and your journey with us. So thank you for that. And anyone that's listening, if this episode resonated with you, please share it with someone else that you feel like it could help. If you like what you heard, feel free to subscribe and we'll drop these weekly for you guys. But thank you again, Coach Blueford, for your time. And I'm Bretton Hunt. This was Unstuck. And remember that progress begins with one step. And we'll see you next time.